Okay, so welcome back to our AQRA Virtual Conference 5.4. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our next speaker. His name is Dr. King Costa. Dr. Costa is the Managing Director, Registrar at Global Center for Academic Research. He's also Research Associate Professor at the Amadi University College in Swaziland. He's the author of the Costa Research Model. This is what he's going to present this afternoon, which is a pedagogy for teaching and coaching postgraduate students on research methods. And I think, Dr. Costa, you should share to our audience the link to your newly published article. Would you like to do that? He has just published an article in the World Conference on Qualitative Research ebook. He is a member of the following professional bodies: AQRA, SIMES, and SARIMA. And he is a research supervisor and coach of master's and PhD students across many universities in South Africa and other countries. He is an academic mentor at Poblon's Academy, where he supervises learning on peer review methods. He is passionate about qualitative research and mixed methods of inquiry. He has contributed chapters in 2 academic research books published in Europe and USA, respectively. Dr. Costa, we are very pleased to give you now the time as you present your presentation titled Systematic Guide to Qualitative Data Analysis within the Costa Postgraduate Research Model. So welcome, Dr. Costa.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Sally, and to all the panelists and everybody that is here. It's great that you are here and you are still safe. We are all together. Thank you so much. As I'm just trying to share my slide. All right. Is it? Okay. So the program started, or I'm going to give a background to the systematic qualitative data analysis that we use, and then I will show how it is applied and then get deeper into it. And then somewhere I'll also talk about the rigor, because it's very critical that in our work we show how rigor was presented. This project started in 2018, whereby before that I had a question whereby a lot of students would actually show a need to complete their dissertations or their research reports or their master's or even their PhD studies. And that was just not happening. So out of curiosity, I really wanted to find out what was happening in institutions of higher learning. And so I conducted a systematic review and to answer the question, what are the challenges of postgraduate research supervision in South African universities? And I was shocked to find out that most of these institutions do enroll quite a number of students, but those who make it at the end of the term are far, far few. That study is available. I'll share it at the end of the day. So, but it's the study that gave rise to the Costa model. And we found out that students were struggling with quite a number of things. One of them, the major one, was the research language. Most students in their undergrads are not taught about the language applicable to writing your research and the academic language required. But the other thing was that as most universities, and particularly in South Africa, there was this transition from qualifications, particularly at master's level, that have got a component of taught aspect and research. you'll find out that most academics are swamped with work. As a matter of fact, one of the study came out with a research concept called supervisor burden, because these supervisors were burdened with a lot of work. They've got to teach, they've got to supervise. And that was just compounding the problem. And the third problem was where you would find out that there is a dispute between a research supervisor and sometimes the research committee of the university, or a conflict, maybe even with the external examiners, or including a conflict between the student and the supervisor. So those were main problems. Students would apply on a master's program or a PhD program, get a supervisor, but it takes about a year, sometimes even 2 years, just to work on a proposal. And by that time, that supervisor has found a job elsewhere, has moved to greener pastures elsewhere, and the student is left in limbo. So that's what brought to the formulation or creation of the Costa model. And the Costa model, as Dr. Seli just said, has been published, and I'll share you the link just now, where I'll share with you the link just before I finish. I'll share with you the link where it is published in Portugal. But some of that work as well, which is not necessarily related to the Costa model, but other aspects of the Costa model, has been published at the University of Washington in the USA recently. It's interesting, just in the month of July, both were published as book chapters. The Costa model is made up of 5 stages that are required to build and develop the competence of researchers. And we start with the concepts, because that's where language, the research language is. And as a matter of fact, that's where even the pre-proposal literature review can actually be done, and the student can actually get familiar with methods of how to come up or to identify the gap, and how to actually formulate a problem and come up with a research question. That was absolutely very important. And also understanding of different methods, because we know, ladies and gentlemen, that in qualitative research, the complexity is presented by the multi-methods that are available, which students have to choose to align to their research question. In most cases, you would find a student goes up front and says, I'm going to be doing a case study, without trying to link the research question to even the topic, and analyzing and trying to understand, is this question suitable to be answered through a case study, or grounded theory, or ethnography, or narrative research, or any of those. So we wanted to build that solid foundation, and that's what the concepts do. So if you look on the slide that I'm presenting, we put it graphically and using the image of the head, because we believe that students need to find a way, or a method, a heuristic approach to internalizing the research processes. And that is why we say internalize, love it, and complete it. And we believe that once they're exposed to the language and all the dynamics of research, they get fond of it, they get to love it. And really, your output is the labor of love at the end of the day, and it should be like that. So today, the systematic approach to qualitative data analysis is, if you look at the slide, is at stage 4, which talks about the text, because right there at the text, we're looking at method, all methods, procedures that were applicable in any particular study. So I'll be focusing on data analysis mainly today, but the Costa method is a pedagogy that is developing, that many insights still come from time to time as we engage with the students and we see where their problems are. So it's not like a one station, but we are moving all the time. And so our method, it's based on or hinged upon thematic analysis. Interestingly, all the time you meet with students and you ask them, what method of analysis are you going to use? They'll be telling you that you're going to be using thematic analysis. Sometimes they would say content thematic analysis. Sometimes they would say content analysis. Yes, indeed. These concepts can really be very confusing. So we had to find ways of trying to simplify analysis, data analysis for students. One of the inspirations we had was the work of Clark and Brown. They did great work. Since 2006, you'll find that most qualitative research outputs will always be quoting them because they really simplified. And we felt that we could take the simplification further for students to understand what is entailed in data analysis. So thematic analysis, its origins are in content analysis. Interesting. So as you can see on my slides there, it is a method or a technique that is used from a variety of sources that are collected. Most of them are textual, so it could be reports, transcripts, sometimes videos as well, because there is communication there as well. So videos and audios. So this is a method that is used holistically to actually analyze that. It's an old method, the content analysis method. It's actually a research approach on its own, but it's also very useful for analyzing data. And this is where thematic analysis also originates from. Now, the content analysis on its own, if you look at its slide, has got three divisions. You've got a conventional content analysis, which really looks at coding categories as derived directly from the data. And then you've got the directed one that is mainly using some form of a theory. When you go into the analysis, you are backed up by some theory. I'll explain this a little bit further as I go on in the presentation. And then you've got the summative, emphasizing the quantification or quantizing of codes or counting and comparing to understand, because what we do in qualitative research really, as once proposed or postulated by one of the founders of this method, who's Max Weber, a German sociologist sometime in the 18th century, he came up with a word like Verstehen, which is, I can't pronounce German, so those that speak German can pronounce it better for me. But Verstehen means understanding. And this is what we want. We want to understand human experiences. We want to understand human behavior. And this must come out rich in a well-coordinated and systematic approach to analyzing data that presents those experiences of human beings, right? And then the application of content analysis is it's per disciplines, and it's used mainly in two broad disciplines. And this is in human sciences, where a method of discourse analysis is used. Discourse analysis studies communication particularly, and looks at words and expressions as they are made. There might be a little bit line, or a small, a thin line between discourse analysis and thematic analysis. But thematic analysis, which focuses on generating themes, originates or is used mainly in business research, social sciences, and anthropology. So this is where we're going to be focusing on. The systematic guide to qualitative research within the Costa framework is based or hinged upon thematic analysis. So thematic analysis obviously looks at distinctions of themes, the relationship between these themes, and calculation of frequencies within these categories to understand the magnitude, the impact, the breadth, and the depth of the phenomenon that we're talking about, right? And also what is critical in thematic analysis is the sources of these messages. And also, these messages are sent to particular recipients, their responses to these messages. But what are the purposes of the messages as well? And obviously, I've talked about how the participants would respond to these messages. This is absolutely critical and needs to be captured in the way we analyze data to reflect the aspirations of the people that we interviewed and the purposes of the study. So if you look at this slide is a representation of all the stages that are covered within our qualitative data analysis method. And ladies and gentlemen, if you look at these stages, you will not see anything really much different. So in most thematic analysis methods, you still go through those 6 stages. We have created this as a pedagogy, as a tool to help students to understand what is a generally accepted method. Not forgetting that when it comes to qualitative research, a lot of scholars seem to disagree. There is no one way or one size fits all within the qualitative research, as opposed to quantitative, which you have established methods of data analysis. Within qualitative, someone might use, for instance, template analysis. Someone might use constant comparative analysis. Someone might use different. But what I've seen, looking at most methods within qualitative research, most of them seem to have some form of origin from grounded theory where codes come in. So at the end of the day, it's about establishment of codes and then generating themes out of those codes to understand what is happening. So these steps look at the first stage being data tools. Your data tools are your transcripts, your field notes that you used, your reflexive statements, your images and videos, all that you collected when you were interviewing your participants. Interestingly, ladies and gentlemen, with our qualitative data analysis, we actually ask students to note or to realize that their research question or a topic is absolutely important, that from the time of crafting a proposal, chapter 1, chapter 2, where you are now collecting secondary data through literature, it's very important that all those key concepts within your research topic or your research question are always adhered to. Everything that you look at is actually aligned to them. They're key variables that you are actually using for your research, such that when the time comes for going out and meeting with your participants, it's very important to know that your objectives are embedded in these research concepts or variables. Otherwise, your study will not talk to your research question or your topic. It will be sort of disintegrated. So it's very important that everything we do from chapter 1, we're already thinking of how data is going to be collected and what sense is going to come out from the time we do chapter 1, chapter 2, and then going out there, or question construction for participants and actually integrating them. So here you come back, you've got your data tools, and then your analysis areas are their perspectives, their rationale for their paradigm. Why do they believe what they believe, and how do they project their beliefs to others? Because what's critical in our field of study, which is qualitative research, is that you have your own perceptions as well. Your participants have got their diverse perceptions, different participants. So that's why it's important. Stage 1 on the slide and stage 2 are very, very, very important, because with stage 2, you are familiarizing yourself with this data. So data, in other words, your audio clips have been now transcribed. They are data, we call that a data document. So you are actually reading this line by line, word by word, over and over again. It's something that you've got to do quite often to understand and be familiar with all issues, corners, every part of your data. You do that by that iterative process. So it's very important. Most students would run to a cactus, softwares. Softwares are critical, but they're not going to do the job for you. It's, it's a responsibility of the researcher to familiarize themselves with this data. The softwares are going to help you to manage that data. We are currently working with WebQDA in Portugal with Dr. Costa, whereby we are integrating the very same model I'm presenting now into that software. It's not a cookbook. The students need to do certain things because the software is for management and arrangement and data storage. And I'll get that into that a little bit later. So you get to a third stage of initial coding, and then your Excel coding, and sometimes you can even extend it to even third coding and present your results as simply as that. So how do you do that? Right. So I've already talked about the stage one, which is all a myriad of information that you have, not from one participant, from all your participants. You are faced with this data. What do you do? That's not the time to run away and say, I'm going to have a software do this for me. You need first to familiarize yourself with this data. But your data, really, it looks like a web of information. It's pointing to one direction. And as a qualitative researcher, you already have in mind that you would like to see something like this. Ideally, you want to get codes, but you are immersed yourself, hence the term immersion. You are in this data, so you are part of this data. As it flashes like this is an indication, or it's just a representation of how the data talks to yourself. Yes, I use the word data talks. We must not and avoid the tendency to try and talk on behalf of the data. The data, or our responsibility, is to, interpret it, but it must speak on its own. And how does it speak on its own? It speaks on its own by, through you and using certain processes, breaking it down in a form of resolution, or what we call reduction according to Costa. You are reducing it, and that process is now your analysis. But students, to try and achieve what you are seeing there with those codes, blue, red, just an indication of how codes will come in different formats, students would usually, and this is what we found because we conducted a mapping review to understand these challenges with regards to how conclusions are made in qualitative dissertations and reports. So students, in their quest to transform the data from this, this web that you are seeing, to transform it, to make it meaningful information, students tend to use the questions they heard designed for interviews with participants. And all of a sudden, their transformation would mean these questions now become themes. And immediately they would say, question one, so many participants said this, and try to interpret it on their own without allowing that data to actually speak for itself. So this is the tendency that we found when we were doing our mapping review. We found out that the students would do that, and we discourage that. And not just ourselves alone, a lot of scholars, and particularly Black and Brown, have actually said that students have quoted them, that they use them, but they feel they're being misquoted because this practice is purely skimming in the periphery of the data. When we know that in qualitative research, we are looking for deep insights, we are looking for thick rich descriptions, down, layers and layers that are hidden at the bottom of the periphery. So we need to allow students and teach them to go down. So how do they literally go down, right? First, let's allow data to speak for itself. And you are seeing the slide, you are wondering, how does it speak for itself? Right. This is an example. To allow data to speak for itself, certain decisions have to be made. You as a qualitative researcher, for instance, you've got to think about the strategy that you are going to apply. There's quite a number of strategies out there, but even before you think of that strategy, an approach is required. We are proposing two approaches that work hand in hand. And most qualitative data analyst specialists in this forum would have seen this method before. When you talk about the a priori codes are codes that are derived deductively from your research question. You know, those variables, those key variables, those terms that you defined in chapter 1, and you now examined them in literature in chapter 2, those are your deductive codes. And I'll show you how they help direct your coding. That's the decision that you've got to make. And these deductive codes are also called anchor codes because they're actually anchoring your data during the process of coding. Then you've got posteriori codes. These now are very inductive in the nature that these are significant statements. These are some important statements that you pick up as a qualitative data analyst in your transcripts. You are picking them up, and you could find them important because you might have been doing literature review and seeing some of these. Now you are looking at your data. The same things that came out of your secondary research are now coming out of your data. So that is one of the example of what makes it to be significant. Or the particular phrase or sentence or representation is repeated quite more often. So it becomes important. You might have passed it once, twice, and all of a sudden as you go down, you are seeing it and you go like, aha, there is something here. Let me find out what this is all about. So you go back and you start now to code that as well. These are your significant statements. You do them inductively. In other words, you are taking them out of data, and that's what I mean when I say data speaks for itself. Are you aware that as I'm talking, I'm no longer saying now so and so said this, so and so said this. The data itself speaks on its own. So then you've got to decide on the coding strategy. And the coding strategy, as proposed by Saldana, you will see that I think they've got about 30 coding strategies in there. We seem to be, in our practice, seeing these 4 strategies coming out. Your emotion strategy, which really looks at the emotions that emerge from the data. It could be anger, it could be joy, it could be happiness, it could be frustrations, those emotions that keep on coming out of data. So you could actually use that emotion coding, and then also value coding about their beliefs. And you'll find this mainly in grounded theory or in ethnography, where you've got to be with the participants for some time and you get to reflect on their beliefs and to understand their beliefs and the way they do things. And then descriptive, which describes the situations. These are some of the strategies you may use. And then as well, the in vivo, which is quite common, where you are now doing direct codes, and it's helping to strengthen and legitimize your conclusions. You'll see that in our sources there, we put Johnny Saldana, but we also put in the last 2019. This is when we actually started to use this method. And in some of the dissertation in one of the top universities in Johannesburg, they actually applauded him for using this method because there was so much explication and demonstration of how data spoke for itself and how rigor was observed through allowing it. But as well, replication of the method, because that's very critical in research, that when somebody looks at what you've done, can they be able to do it? So reproducibility of the method is absolutely critical. So that study is available, and this morning, I think I was talking to Dr. David, and actually I was not talking to him, but I happened to be sending that link. So we'll make it available to those that are interested to see how fully that method was applied. But there are a few instances that I'm actually going to reflect in here in the coding method. Now, here is coding. This slide shows coding. You actually are able to do it in most popular softwares, and definitely the Web QDA does allow this functionality, which we are using to integrate the Costa method into it. It does allow this functionality, and the nice thing is that it actually can allow both deductive coding or even flat tree coding. You can actually do that, right? So this, most of you might be familiar, even on a software, on a Microsoft Word, so you could be familiar with that. So there isn't much difference, but at the end of the day, this is a process of data reduction. As you can see now that you are creating codes and you're going to separate them from the main document, and these codes will stand on their own. And when they stand on their own, in this particular study that I was referring to, and I'm going to use an example of two studies. This study was the perceived effectiveness of executive coaching for leadership development in South Africa. It's available on the internet. So we got these codes, and there were about 700 codes. In another study that we're looking at intimate partner violence, one of my students has come up with about over 1,000 codes. So this really does happen, and it can be very frustrating. It is a very heavily involved process. It needs the students not to think about anything, but to focus on this. In other words, I'm saying you need to have a high alertness. That is where now softwares come in handy and helpful, because you may forget when you do it manually on your own, but you still instruct the software to do what you are seeing. You'll see that on the slide, there are different colors. Those words that are colored are actually your anchor codes, or what I call deductive codes, or your a priori codes. These are broken down from your research topic. There could be a few additions that you put in to help yourself, but mainly they are actually from your research questions. So as you analyze your data, you are actually linking it to your topic or to your research question, as you can see in the slide. And then the next stage, obviously, when you've done this, is to start again, look at these and say, how can I now put them together? But you'll see, ladies and gentlemen, most of that task is already created, because it's easy now to actually put them into particular categories, those that have certain similarities, and then you put them together. And when you put them together, then you start to again go into them once more. Try to understand, what is this data saying to you? What are you actually learning out of this? What could this be meaning? And obviously, you are going to come up with different thematic expressions of what you feel is coming out of this data. You need to keep that accuracy, because we are all the time accused as qualitative researchers, because most of our decisions come from us inductively, but they are actually influenced by that data. So you need to be able to demonstrate where what came from. You will see in the slide that as we were trying to arrange the first part of the Excel coding stage, we were trying to arrange the data. Now you got the themes and you put them nicely, but you are linking them. You are linking them to your first codes that you have on the left, which you have actually tried to put together. And these codes are also easily linked back to your data documents, which is the transcripts, which means that there is that consistency, but there is also that audit capability that you are creating, because whatever you say can be linked to exactly what your participants have said. So I've given these two slides just to demonstrate that from that very same study. But here's another study that so final things came in this particular one. And as you can see, that each theme was actually linked back to the anchor code. So when you get to that anchor code, you are able to see small pieces that came together and were synthesized to actually come up with some whole. So there was data, you broke it down, and then again, you built it together to make some meaning according to what you were looking for. So this is what the final things would come in. If you were doing grounded theory, you would actually take this further and now try to find what theory can actually come out of this. In this particular example, this was only on, it was just a phenomenological study, so they did not want to go further. They just wanted to get the themes and then look at their objectives and say, do these things speak to what they were actually looking for? Right. This, you know, ladies and gentlemen, obviously after getting all your data, your codes, you can put them just to see what was the words that actually came quite often, and just to help you. But that's just another way of presenting your data. Now, this, you can do it separately, or you can do it in most softwares. They allow for this to be done, and most definitely the Web 2.8 does that as well. Right? Here is another method where you do not have your deductive codes, but you've got a research question framed so well that when you go into the data, certain aspects already speak to what you are looking for. And this happened in a systematic review. We tend to be so much in love as well with systematic reviews, because we know that they are helping us to research on research that has been done already. So this was a systematic review. And so it was easy because the codes were linked to the PICO. The PICO standing for the population place, and then the intervention that you are putting in place, and then the comparator, or the comparison you are comparing your intervention or the scenario to, and then the desired outcome. So this study was based on that, and the coding method was actually looking at that. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where we're demonstrating the flexibility of the thematic analysis first as a method, and the way we actually are doing it within our framework. So that flexibility is still there. What is critical is to demonstrate how what was done, and was it done in terms of acceptable standards? Can you demonstrate? Can you present that? Can you show where it was done? So this is just another example. And you see the student was actually looking at the opportunities for ice cream business in one of the provinces. So you can actually see when he put the codes, ice cream came out. I said, research is the labor of love. So he really defended his case and said, ice cream is for people who want to be happy. Right, but now you've got all your codes, and you can see this is that particular study of the PICO. So you put now the codes together. You've dealt away with your data documents. You are keeping them as your data sources, or your data, your data tools. You're putting them there for any verification in future. And then you put up your codes, and you can see how codes came out. And ladies and gentlemen, the interesting thing is that, again, as I said, students are able to link this back to the original data that you have, and then you already count them. You have seen when we're talking about content analysis and explaining the three methods being conventional, directed, and summative. And the reason we had to show that is because since thematic analysis originates from content analysis, it made sense for us to understand that the need for quantification or quanticizing is not for statistical purposes, even though to a certain extent, students would show certain percentages. For instance, I would ask you how far I am with regard to my presentation, Dr. David, and you could say that I'm 30% or 40% towards time that is required. So we use 30%, we use percentages, we use these, but not necessarily to do these inferential statistics, but to actually explain the degree and the magnitude of what we're talking about. So you could see down here, if you're looking at this, then you get to understand how impactful, or what they would call, and I'll talk about it here now, is the size effect. Yes, size effect is it's a construct that is used in quantitative research, but there are scholars who are actually proposing that we need to use it appropriately for our side of qualitative research. Remember, here we just want to understand. So there is your slide again. Now, if I just want to demonstrate why we using quantitatives or quanticizing in qualitative research. This is a very controversial view to quite a number of established qualitative researchers. The work of John Creswell, lately, he's actually been talking and even advocating for mixed methods, because he's actually understanding that in most things that we do, there will always be a number. I ask you how many kids you have, you'll count them, you'll tell them. I ask you how many participants you had, you'll always count them. So there are also very opportunities presented by that on its own. So you can see the categories are nicely created, and you know how many elements are in each category. But the accusation that has come out from particularly the quantitative researchers, ladies and gentlemen, as I was doing this work, I was shocked to find out that in other corners, established institutions of research look at qualitative researchers as superstitious, purely because we are not actually going to the extent of using these numbers to explicate the depth and breadth of the situation you're talking about. They say we cannot legitimize our conclusions. We cannot demonstrate the characteristics and the size effect, the effect of the codes, or the effect of the phenomenon on its own, and the precision of accounts. So I do encourage students using this kind of method, that you are able to present the precision of that account. Precisely, you know exactly what happened. If you are doing a study on behavior like what we had before, and you've seen in the study that was presented just before my presentation, how numbers were useful, to help the researcher to actually come to formulate a theory. So, but we can take that much further and use it as well as for generalization. And I'll just be showing you some few articles. But right, so we count. One of the propositions by Maxwell was Becker's quasi-statistics. But you've got Sandalowski, you've got Thorne, you've got Cohen, you've got quite a number of these established researchers in qualitative dimension proposing the best use of our quantizing ability, because we do use these numbers from time to time. And you'll see again, to establish the significance of the research project on its own, documenting what is known about the problem. If you are talking about, which is one of the studies we are currently doing now, intimate partner violence, certain things are coming out of that data, and we are now able to actually document what is known and even what is also coming out. So that's a sample description. But labor and the complexity of qualitative research, again, I call it labor of love, right? Then documenting and verifying or even testing the interpretation of our findings and the targeting events and the experiences of our participants. Look at this. I know it might be difficult for you to see, but let's hope you can see the slide clearly. I've underlined certain aspects on this publication done by Thorne, and if there's a need for it, I'll provide the full article. But this particular aspect was saying, through rigorous inductive analysis, together with the use of confirmatory strategies that address the credibility of the conclusions, qualitative researchers can arrive at insightful inductive generalizations. And we're talking internal generalizations, to be able to generalize within a particular context. For instance, we're looking at the perpetrators of violence. We are able to generalize within that particular context. But not only that, as it happens with statistical generalizability, our approach provides analytical generalizability, and it's ideal to be used by qualitative researchers. These are propositions that we are actually sharing with this colloquium here, this conference, because these are much, much more helpful. Now, Anthony Onebuzi also talked about the task of using general or what is called analytic generalizability in qualitative research, just to enhance already what we know about rigor, which we already have, these methods that we have of rigor. And just to enhance, we can also use these numbers to put much more strength, and then go back to the postulations of Lincoln and Guba, which is most traditional across all qualitative researchers. And we do propose, ladies and gentlemen, that in this method, we are able to demonstrate some of these as you are seeing them. And I think this is my last slide. We tried to condense this presentation as much as we could. And I think I've come to an end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Costa. That is a new and enlightening presentation. We have many positive responses from our viewers on this topic. I would like to ask more on further information. Where can we refer to find more about your model and this type of data analysis? Do you have any article or maybe some,
Okay, I think I was asked by Dr. Seli as well to share first the Costa model, which really helps. So I would like to do that now. Let's see if
Dr. Costa, I already posted in the chat.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay. Okay.